My name is Grace Allman, and this is the final speech from my Regent public speaking class. Here are my audience members. I chose to redo the informative speech. First, I'd like to introduce you to Sally. Well, Sally here has just turned 1. She looks a little older, but she just turned 1. And her family decided to throw a birthday party. And Sally here, her dad is American, and her mother is Korean. So what they compromised on is throwing an American birthday party first. So that comes with the balloons, the cake smashing, the presents, a lot of friends and family come to the house and just have a fun time opening gifts and throwing cake. That was great. They loved it and enjoyed it. But Sally's mother was like, I think I want to hold a traditional birthday party like we did in Korea that I did for myself, but I don't quite remember what happened during it. So Sally's mom and dad sat down and planned her a traditional doldanchi. Now, doldanchi is a celebration held in Korea to celebrate the first birthday. And the reason why doldanchi is not widely known in Korean families now in modern time in 2020 is because the tradition has slightly changed from the 18th century practice. So doldanchi originated around the 18th century due to high infant mortality rates. The children were just not surviving after their first birthday or up to their first birthday. That was due to either bad medical practices, bad birthing, something wrong with the child, or a famine. The child just wasn't living up to that first birthday. So when they did, it became a grand celebration of life that the child made it that far. So during this doldanchi celebration, the dol meaning birthday and janchi meaning feast, the family would get together in a long hall. Basically, it looked more like a wedding than it did like an American birthday. And they'd gather around tables to pray to the gods. And the gods they prayed to were San-shin and Sam-shin. They sound very familiar, but there's a difference in letters, an N and an M. So San-shin is the god of the mountains. In Korea, their landscape has a lot of mountainous terrain. And they believe the mountain was the highest place to the gods, believing that the mountain god had some connection to the deities in the sky. And Sam-shin is the goddess of childbirth. So they're thanking the goddesses and God for having their child survive that long and hoping for protection so that the child can survive later in their years, because the mortality rate then was still low. So they prayed to these gods to have insurance that their child would live a happy life. So these families would gather and pray over the food and the child, and then sit down to feast. So the feast usually consisted of rice cakes, fruits, meats, and those represented the prosperity, happiness, and the next generations of the family. The more food, the better, the fresher, the more happiness the family would get. So at this table, the child would be passed around one to one and be formally introduced to the family and friends. So that'd be their name and introductions and formal hellos. And in return, they would receive a gift, usually a money packet, or back in the 18th century, it would be their first golden ring. They'd get a ring to celebrate their first birthday. And then after that, the child would be taken back so that they can eat. And then somewhere in between all of the feasting and praying, they'd be taken to a table with lots of items put across it. And this table is the doljabi table. And this is also the doljabi ceremony, where the child would be placed in front of various items representing different career or lifestyle paths, and the child would be then encouraged to pick one. So if there was a weapon on the table, they'd probably be in the military, a guard, some sort of law enforcement. If there was money, they could be a banker, an accountant, a rich person. A paintbrush, they could be an artist, or probably an accountant again, maybe something in a political place. And if they had like a book, they could be a teacher or a librarian, something along there. And the child is then encouraged to pick one, and that would be their future. Parents could also participate in the fun of the activity by betting on what the child would pick. Now, traditionally, it's a wide spread of things: sports items, medical equipment, scholarly things, fun stuff like art and dance. But if you wanted to have a little more say in what your child wanted, You could probably take away that paintbrush, take away the dance items, put more money on the table, and no one would ever know. But it's up to the parents to decide what they choose. Then after that, they basically retire for the night. Now during this whole celebration, the child would be donned in their hanbok and traditional Korean garb. The hanbok is the hat that the parents would purchase for the child, and this would be the first purchased hat the child would receive. And then that's it. The party is over, everyone goes home, and everyone's happy. But nowadays, because infant mortality rates are lower, children are surviving past their first birthday, and a lot more are doing so, it became less of a important ceremonial thing to celebrate the first birthday. It just became one in the next 50 they could have. And also, Korean parents in the modern world are finding it more expensive to hold a doldanchi party and having it have less return to them. A typical party with all of the actual traditional garb, food, placement, and all of that is about 3.5 million won, which in American dollars, that's about $3,000 for a party that the child won't even remember. That just doesn't seem pleasant to a lot of adults nowadays. And also, the tradition stemmed from pagan worship as well. The gods that they worshipped either are no longer in their regards or they no longer want to follow that tradition. They just push it aside and opt for a more American-styled birthday. But I believe that even if you don't want to follow the very hardcore traditional ceremony, foods, or even outfits or worship, you can still participate in what the doldanchi means. It's a celebration of life. Even though young children are still surviving and going way past the age of 1, it's still a celebration to have your child reach that first mark. And I believe that that doesn't have to disappear just because you don't want to pay for the clothing or you don't want to pay for a big ceremony. You can still have the small doldabi table, you can still do the fun predictions, you just don't have to put as much emphasis on the things you don't want. And you can still participate in cheaper doldanchi celebrations because there's a lot of traditional planning sites and Korean traditional party places that you can go and get smaller kits of everything you need for cheaper. So even though that things are changing and the meaning behind things are being lost in the wave of all that's happening in the modern world, we don't have to lose the core of where we came from and what we celebrate and what we believe in. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about doldanchi.